Hello and welcome to the Mighty Oaks Show. My name is Jeremy Stalnecker. I'm the Executive Director of the Mighty Oaks Foundation and looking forward to a great show today. We'll jump into it in just a second. But before we do, if you have not yet subscribed on the YouTube channel, please do that. You can hit the subscribe button. Also, go to the notification button. That will let you know when new episodes come online. If you're listening either as a podcast or over on our partners at Mojo, glad to have you listening, but go over to our YouTube page and check that out. A lot of video there, a lot of content. And we'd love to include you there. Please subscribe. But here we are. It's great to have another opportunity to talk about something that is very, very important. And if you watch the show often, you know that we try to deal with a lot of different topics, but primarily those related to either the military or the first responder community. And we've had a lot of guests from both communities on not too long ago, and maybe we can put this down in the comments section later on of this video, but not too long ago we had both the police chief and fire chief for the city of Murrieta, the city where we live and the city where we have our headquarters, on this show, and we talked about a lot of the traumas and a lot of the issues that both law enforcement and fire service folks deal with. And it's amazing how much crossover there is between the two communities. And so we have the opportunity as an organization to have law enforcement, firefighters, other first responders join our programs. We now have, this next year, we'll have 2 dedicated programs for the first responder community, and pretty stoked about that. But I want to talk today about something that is very current in these communities. I've got Gabe Aponte here, and Gabe is a current police officer with the City of Murrieta Police Department. Just took a new position.
Yep.
The resource officer.
Yep, at Vista Murrieta High School.
Vista Murrieta High School. Just all kinds of hate and discontent.
It's awesome.
Why would anyone want to go back to high school?
I love it. They're awesome kids.
It's a lot better going back as a police officer than as a student, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good.
And with Gabe, we've got John Davis. And again, if you watch the show, you know John. John is a retired Whittier police officer, also served in the Army, which no one really cares about, but he did serve in the Army, and so that was also good. John served in Panama and in Desert Storm.
Yes, sir.
That's right. And has done a lot of other things, but now he works with us here at Mighty Oaks and processes all of our applications, which sounds like process applications. That is a huge job. We'll have about 800 students come through our program this year, and John interfaces with all of those, and then is one of the leaders in our first responder program. So pretty excited about it. But I want to talk about this issue, and we'll get into it in just a second. We'll talk about not veteran suicide, suicide amongst police officers. And man, what an issue. We talk about veteran suicide all the time. And Gabe, you served in the Marine Corps as well, so that's you know, there's a lot of crossover here in your life. But we talk about veteran suicide all the time. Today I want to talk specifically about suicide in the police departments and police departments across the country, and we'll get there in just a second. But before we do, we've heard John's story, but tell us your story. Where'd you come from? Where were you raised? How'd you end up as a police officer?
So I was born in San Diego, and when I was around 8 or 9, we moved up to Northern California. My dad got a job about 2 hours north of San Francisco.
Oh yeah.
Joined the Marine Corps at 21. I was doing odd jobs. I played baseball and just having fun. And knew I didn't want to go back to school, so I joined the Marine Corps. Deployed to Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom 2. Yeah. I was a radio operator with 1st Battalion 4th Marines, and we were in. I started out in Fallujah and then went over to Najaf, where I was there for the rest of my deployment. Wow. Seeing all of the oppression and the way that it, just essentially the disgustingness of power really hit me hard over there, and it made me want to come back and get into law enforcement.
What do you mean the disgustingness of power?
Just how followers of Saddam, the people in the ING, they could go and just, if they wanted something in a business, they just walk in and take it. If they wanted your wife, they take your wife. If they wanted to take whatever you had, they would just take it. And if you were
because they could, there's
because
nothing
they
you
could,
do about it.
because nobody would fight for them. And that really was difficult because I'd see, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds in just giant adult clothing with huge shoes, pulling like a cart with a donkey and trying to find stuff to take home, and there was no parent around.
Yeah.
And I mean, it could have been that their parent was off, either trying to fight or that, they were killed. I don't know, but just watching that defenselessness just really was difficult on me.
Yeah.
So I knew I wanted to be in law enforcement. I knew that I wanted to make it a career. So got out of the Marine Corps, joined the police department. I literally went from, I got out of the Marine Corps one day. The next day I drove my family up to Northern California. The day after that I was assigned employee. Wow. And then 2 weeks after that I was back a recruit again at the police academy.
What department were you working for?
Ukiah PD. Okay. Up in Mendocino County.
Yeah.
So from there, I spent about 6 years there. And then my sister went to the Calvary Marietta Bible College here.
Right.
And my brother and sister ended up moving down here. So I looked into it and I knew that this is the place where I wanted to be. So we made the move, came down here, and I've been here since 2013.
Yeah. Did you, we just had another police officer who's actually gone through our program as well, but he was in the Marine, military. I think he was in the Army before that. I get all of them confused. If it was a Marine, I'm just not ever sure what anyone did. So, but he's in the Army. But he talked about how he came back from Iraq, and there probably was some things, or were some things that he should have been struggling with. Mm-hmm. But because he went right into the police department, right into the training process as well, he never dealt with those things until later.
Yeah.
Was that similar to you? Did you carry something in?
That's exactly spot on. My wife and I, as we talk about it now today, there were things that happened that I don't even remember. Right. Things that I was struggling with, outbursts of anger, just being so tied up inside and angry and not knowing how to let that out. She tells me about all this stuff that she, essentially survived through just by loving me. Yeah. And reminded me of all these things, and I had no real recollection of it. Yeah. I'm like, what? Yeah. I did what?
Right.
And she's like, yeah, remember, like that year was so hard for us. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, it was? Like, but I was blind to it.
Right.
Right. So.
Yeah. And then transitioned into police work.
And so I was struggling with all these things and I didn't deal with them. And then I go into law enforcement, and it's different being in law enforcement than it is in the military. When you go to combat, you deploy and then you come back and that's it. You go to work every day, you go, I was a radio guy, so I would, taking care of radios and doing stuff. There was no violence, there was no threat, there was no harm. I didn't see horrible things. It was you come in, you PT in the morning, do your thing, go home. Yeah. So when I transitioned into law enforcement, it was a rude awakening because it was every day. You go there and you're saturated in this environment where you see like that nasty 1% of the population, the people that want to hurt other people, or the people that are out to commit crimes, and you got to catch them. And then there's that element, and then there's the element of now you're a first responder. When someone calls and says, my 12-year-old just killed himself and he's hanging in the closet, you're the first one there. Yeah. And you got to triage the situation. Is it safe for medical to come in? Yeah, it's safe. And we bottle all these things up, just like in Mighty Oaks when they talk about your rucksack. You just pile it on them, and you never deal with these things. Yeah. And it just comes to a point where you do one of two things. Either you check out completely or you turn into that monster and you end up tearing your own life apart. Yeah.
When you transitioned from one police department down here, was part of that for you getting away or a fresh start? Or
so the community that we lived in up in Northern California, when I would go to like Walmart and go shopping, I'd see the same people.
Sure, yeah.
And no one really liked law enforcement up there, just in the city that I was in, just because it was saturated with crime. Just the homelessness, all of that just was getting out of control. Right. And then coming here, it was, I'm like, I remember my first day with my FTO, field training officer down here. I was going down the road and this giant biker guy pulls up next to us. And he's like, hey, I need to talk to you. And I'm like, I look over at my FTO, I'm like, here we go. It's about to go down. Here we go. It's about to go down. So I get out and I'm like, hey, what's going on, man? And he's like, hey, we know you guys work hard around here. And I'm like, is this like some sort of
setting me up or something?
And he reaches in his cut and he pulls out a gift card.
No
and
way.
it's a Chick-fil-A gift card. And he's like, hey, we want to support you guys, want to give it to you.
Yeah.
I look at my FTO and I'm like, I know I'm not supposed to take gratuities. And he's like, I don't think you want to upset
Yeah, I think I'd take that one.
that large man. I was like, oh, thank you, sir. And then I go to Chick-fil-A and I realize that they give a law enforcement uniform 50% off.
Yeah.
So my mind's blown.
Yeah.
And so the transition was great.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll never leave this place. I bleed this place.
Right.
I love it.
Right.
But with all that stuff comes the daily things that we see. And for me, when I was going through all this stuff initially, I wasn't really, the explosive, taking on my family, everyone's living in fear. I would internalize it, and it would come out in other ways, sometimes with anger, but I just wasn't dealing with that process.
Right. Right.
So then I found out about Mighty Oaks. I knew about it because a couple people in our department already went.
Yeah.
Chief is a huge supporter of it. And a friend of mine that I was working with was going through some struggles. And another officer that already went was in adult booking with us. We were processing a prisoner. And he was telling my partner, hey, you ever thought about Mighty Oaks? I'm like, oh, yeah, dude, you should go. And he's like, I don't know. And me being so filled with pride and being blind, I didn't realize what I was struggling with. And I tell him, dude, I'll go with you. Like, I'll support
you.
I'll support you.
I'll be there for you.
You're
I
struggling.
don't need it,
yeah.
but you need it.
You need it, and I want to go.
Right.
I want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
So on the way, so we sign up. On the way to the ranch, there's 2 main highways to get there, essentially. And I knew that. It said it in the email. But my Google app kept telling me to, take these roads.
Right.
Like these ones
Right.
that didn't, it wasn't following the directions. So I started going down these roads, and I realized that they turn into dirt roads, and there's, big, scary trees. And I had to, it was 2 o'clock in the morning because I had to work. So I'm like, dude, I'm never going to find this place going this way. So I turn around and I go back to the highway. And again, Google will try to send me down another road. And I realize that it's filled with potholes and it's dirty and it's scary and it won't get me to where I need to go.
Right.
That happens about 3 or 4 times. The last time I get to the highway and I just sit there and it just hits me right in the face that was my life.
Wow.
I was living my life going down the wrong roads, not sticking to the plan, not going on the right road. And I just sat there in my truck and I cried, man. I realized that just what I was doing. And going through that at Mighty Oaks was something that has changed my life and my family's life forever. I remember it was Wednesday. We started Monday. Wednesday, we're in class, and it just hits me again. More stuff. I text my wife and I say, I don't know what happened. I don't know when. I don't know how. But somewhere along the road, I lost myself.
Wow.
And she texts back that she was crying. And I realized that however much I was trying to hide, however much I was trying to keep inside, I wasn't hiding it from her. My family could see it.
You thought you were holding it right here. No one knows what I'm going through.
Yeah, I thought I was acting. I thought, and I realized that I was asleep in the passenger seat of my own life. And that with all the struggles, all the things I was going through, all the things that I've seen, and the things that were hurting me inside, I realized Satan put me to sleep in a lullaby.
Yeah.
And I woke up and he's driving and I'm like, what is going on? Yeah. And people like this man helped me to uncover the damage that was going on, helped me to strip my pride away.
Yeah.
In law enforcement, it's like you're just filled with, I don't want to say you're not filled with pride, but what we do, you have to be bulletproof. They teach you to be bulletproof, not just in what you do, but inside, because you want to compartmentalize.
Right.
They don't want an officer going up and, crying as he's giving CPR to somebody, or crying with a lady who just, got a black eye from her husband. They need you to be stoic and the recorder of facts, and you need to be able to relay that and remember it and testify in court. So much so that we pull our true selves away, and we don't deal with these things.
Yeah. Man, there's so much there. Okay. I don't even know where to go from there. All right.
That was a week of crying.
Okay, couple things. One thing is this. You just mentioned this, but before I forget it, I'd like for maybe both of you to talk about it.
Sure.
you know, John, we know your story, and you've been through some shootings and some other hard things, and some personal things and family things. You fight, you train fighters. So it is possible to be a man who does hard things, but at the same time, be sensitive in your relationship with God, in your relationship with your wife, in your relationship with your kids. And I think that what you just described is something that a lot of people misunderstand, particularly men that need help. Mm-hmm. They say, well, and I've heard this again and again, you guys have probably both heard this, mm-hmm. When I went to war, I felt like I needed to set my faith aside, or I needed to set this aside so I could do what I needed to do as a man. But that's not necessary. Right. We think it is. But you can do the job. You can do the hard things. You can do what men do, mm-hmm. which is care for their families and provide for their families and serve their communities. And you can do the hard things, but still have a sensitive heart toward people and things. Right.
Well, a little bit on that, and when Gabe was talking, I was thinking about it. The struggle is, you know, you have to show empathy and sympathy, but you can't feel it, mm-hmm. you know, and we talk about that. And we actually teach it. It's like you got to go there and you got to act it. You're almost like, you're acting when you're at these calls, like I really feel for you, but inside you're like, I can't feel it because I got to still do my job. And, sure. And I think that's very confusing for you as a person, as a man. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you get used to, looking back for me, I really saw that is, you know, I started and I really cared about people at the beginning, and I can't say that I didn't at the end, but you know, every day, day in, day out, you're seeing like the 1% that Gabe talked about, and you can't just, you know, spill your emotions out on every single call, and you teach yourself and you train yourself to not feel stuff. Right. And then how are you supposed to turn that off when you go home? And also, you know, and eventually, slow process that you go home and you're kind of the same way in a sense, that you might show it, but you don't really feel it. You kind of feel numb. So it's a tough balance doing that job and then still truly, you know, loving your family and stuff. Yeah. How do you deal with it now? A lot of that same stuff.
So now, I mean, Mighty Oaks, well, first of all, I've learned to be honest with myself and honest with my wife when I'm struggling with things. And I mean, she's really the hero in my story because I put her through things that, you know, you'd think would make a sane person be like, this guy's, something's wrong here. Yeah. But her love for me, she stayed and helped walk me through it. And she helped me so much to the point that she wants me to talk to her when I'm feeling things. Right. She wants me to explain my feelings. She wants me to reach out. One time we had an argument, and she goes, she's like, you know what? I'm going to call John, and I'm going to tell him what you're going through. I'm going to tell John on you. Yes, and I'm like, no. I'm like, don't do that. I'm sorry. What? Never do it again. No, don't call John. And then I ended up, I think it was like the next day, I went to his house. Yeah. And I'm like, hey man, like this is what happened. You know, what I found out is Mighty Oaks is not like a car wash. Like a lot of people are looking for that car wash. Right, they want to go through quick. Yeah. They want to be clean. Just kind of quick fix. Yeah, but the problem is when the next storm happens and the dirt's kicked up, you're dirty again. Right. What I have found in this process and through the program is that Mighty Oaks it's more like the gym. Like you realize that you have a weakness. You know what it is. Yep. You're willing to go in, put the work in through sweat, through tears, through faithfulness, through an understanding of your weakness. You develop a stronger build on what you're struggling with. Yeah. And it gives you those tools. It gives you cornermen, gives you people where you can call and not be embarrassed. And that's the hardest part with law enforcement. Because you're around all these super tough dudes, you know, and you have this persona of like, you know, I'm not struggling, but if you were like, hey dude, like, that last call was, you know, got me, and you start crying, they might be like, hey, wait, I'm not used to this either. What do I do? Yeah. You know? And you're not going to get the help. For our conversation later, I copied off an article written by a friend of mine named Danny Kuhn. Danny is a friend of mine. We go to church together, but he served with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department for 31 years. So he's retired now, and he writes on, you know, a lot of these issues that we're talking about. His most recent article was, it's time to change the culture, why first responders don't seek help. And there's a graph in here, and I was going to share it later on, but I'll share it now because it's what you were just talking about. Here we go. First responders seeking mental health.
39% say there are negative repercussions for seeking help at work. 39%, and maybe even be higher than that. 55% say their supervisor will treat them differently if they bring up mental health concerns at work. 45% say their coworkers will perceive them as weak if they bring up mental health concerns at work. And then 34% say bringing up mental health concerns at work will cause them to be looked over for promotions. And whether these things are true or not, if people believe they're true, they're not going to share with people that they work with what they're going through.
I mean, I think that's pretty true as far as perception.
Yeah.
You know, for sure. I mean, although when I was in, we didn't even talk about those things, mental health, that aspect. It wasn't even a thing.
Yeah.
Like now, at least it's a thing. And I think the thing with the military and PTSD has really helped in that aspect.
Yeah.
But for me, you know, and as you're saying that, I can't ever remember a call where we actually told each other it bothered us. Obviously, it did. Some of the stuff we saw. That was it was a foreign thing, you know, when I was a police officer, which wasn't that long ago.
You do your thing and you just move on.
You do your thing, move on, laugh about it, joke about it.
So here's another one that I had, another statistic here. And it's because you mentioned it. So we're told that 70% of Americans will encounter some kind of traumatic event at some point in their life. 70% of Americans will deal with something traumatic. I think we'd all agree with that.
Oh, yeah.
It's probably 100%. I don't know. But they say 70%, okay? 188 traumatic experiences on average will be encountered by a police officer over the course of their career. So the average person's dealing with 1 or 2 or 3 or a handful of traumatic events over the course of their lives. Police officers deal on average with 188 traumatic experiences.
Right.
And yet they're in an environment where they don't feel like they can share that with anyone.
Right.
And so you need a Mighty Oaks, or you need something to shake you up and go, no, you're not okay. You are on that road with the potholes, and you're lost in the dark, and you need help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you think you're fooling everybody, but it eventually will come to a head. I mean, it's like taking a deep breath, and then if you don't let that breath out, you just, and it's going to come out with force, and it's going to come out with violence, and it's going to come out in negative ways. And in law enforcement, you go from call to call to call, and you know you might go from doing CPR on somebody. You might go the next call, you're talking to a child that was molested. Then you're going to the next call, and you're giving somebody marriage counseling advice. And you go to the next call, and really what you're shooting for is like, your partner's like, hey, when are we going to meet up and have some coffee? Just to have that time to like be like, okay. But then you get off work, and you go to sleep, and then you get up, and you're a dad, and you're a husband, and you got to be ready for those things. So your RPMs are floored the whole time, and unless you have a program like Mighty Oaks or people that can help to slow you down and help you realize, hey, like, it's okay to be messed up. It's okay to take time for yourself and deal with it. And here are the steps how to do that.
Right. Yeah, we say that the real disorder would be if you dealt with trauma and didn't have some kind of negative reaction to it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The real disorder is I had something bad happen and it didn't affect me.
Yeah, no big deal. You'd be like, okay, that guy's crazy.
Yeah, there's something wrong.
Yeah.
So it's not wrong or even unnatural to respond to trauma. In fact, it's very normal. And we need to get to the point where we talk about that. So that brings us then to the conversation in front of us, right? Suicide amongst police officers, firefighters, the numbers are very close or have been. It's not something that is unknown to us. We know this is a problem. But this year, for whatever reason, maybe the publicity is better, maybe we just know more about it, but police officer suicide is becoming a real problem. It's getting real attention. In New York City, notably, I think it was last week, the 9th police officer took their life. I believe it was the one before that or the one before that, somewhere in those 9. It was a 29-year police officer that took his life. This is obviously a real problem. 73 line of duty deaths this year. 73 line of duty. 124 law enforcement officers who have committed suicide. When the chiefs were on, they kind of agreed that there's about 30% underreporting of these things. So the number's probably much higher than that. What's the problem? Why is it so high amongst police officers?
Man,
I mean, I have some opinions, but from your perspective, your vantage point.
I'll say my perspective just because, I dealt with it personally a little bit. I never put a gun to my head, but I definitely held the gun several times and had that thought, you know, and I guess the overall feeling I had was just the hopelessness and the pain, not knowing how to deal with it, and there was no process. You know, Gabe talked about Mighty Oaks, but I didn't have a support system. I hadn't made myself accountable. I wasn't transparent to anybody, and I just continued to shove things down for a number of years.
Yeah.
And I got to that point where, I mean, the pain inside was like real, you know, serious. And if I ever stopped, you know, there's, you know, in a sense, only one way out. And I think I told you this before last time. For me, probably the thing that I guess helped and prevented me going to the next step was just, you know, I didn't drink, luckily, and it wasn't drugs was ever on board, and
right.
I had boys that I knew I had to live for. So I would say, you know, a lot of the guys probably feel the same way. It's like there's no hope, and this can't ever stop. And that's the thought. Oh, it's not true. You know, it's a lie. Absolutely, but those are the feelings that I felt, and you know, I mean, just dealing with people that are on that edge, like we both have dealt with a lot of people talking about suicide, wanting to kill themselves as police officers. That's something I think is common with a lot of them.
So you both said, and Gabe, you said this, you saw the mistreatment or the abuse of power in Iraq, and you came back and you wanted to make a difference in your community. And John, you and I have talked about this a lot. You know, why do people get into law enforcement? Probably a lot of reasons, but I think most people get into it for that reason, right? They want to help people.
It's a calling.
So at what point do you cross the line and go, now I can't even get away from this?
Right.
Man, it's slow, and that's the other thing we've talked about law enforcement opposed to veterans that go to combat for a year is that you know, you wake up and all of a sudden it's like, how did I get here? Because it doesn't happen overnight. You know, you don't realize it. Like, you know, again, we've talked about this, how I was on it. I knew who I wanted to be. I knew the man I wanted to be, and then slowly I woke up, you know, 5-6 years later, someone totally different. So there wasn't like a point. There wasn't a call that all of a sudden I'm like, forget this, I'm just going to be a jerk. you know, and change everything. It was just a slow process, and if you don't have that stuff in order, and the job itself, you're working shift work, you're working a lot, and then you come home and you're trying to take care of your kids and family, and what gets lost in that is those fundamental things that you have to do to continue to be that man that you want to be, and it's easily lost, you know, and you don't realize it. I didn't realize it, you know, and I think a lot of guys are probably in that boat. Yeah.
What do you think causes a lot of this?
So I think John hit it right on the head when you say, you know, guys feel like they have no way out. I've dealt with suicide in my personal life, and you think about where somebody is in order to end their life. They have to realize first, I think, that there's no other option, and that everything else would be better if they weren't around. So in law enforcement today, you think about all the things we deal with, right? You go home, you deal with drama, you know, lack of a better term, at home, and you deal with issues at home, and when you start holding things in and start having your own issues, that will bleed into your marriage, without a doubt. That'll bleed into the kind of father you are. That'll bleed into your everyday life. And the people around you that care are like, hey, do something about it. Like, if you love me, do something about it. But if you aren't proactive and you don't do something about it, then it starts turning into, you must not care about me if this is how you're going to act. And so you start realizing that now you're in a corner, and when you put a dog in a corner, it's going to bite. And then you compound the issue with the perception on law enforcement from the community. Speaking about New York, when those officers were walking around and people were dumping water on them, and they were literally walking around just like walking back to their car.
Nothing they can do about it.
Nothing in the world. People were throwing stuff, throwing buckets at them, and they retreated back into their cars. And they knew right then that they lost the battle on the way that people perceive them in that area. And we say that pain is relative, right? So these officers that are feeling that there, in their minds, they're like, this is law enforcement across the board, across the nation. So now, even though, you know, the officer was 29 years, that's 29 years, yes, great service, but for what he did, I would say he had 29 years of baggage that he didn't deal with. And it just came to a head. You know, and he realized that things are better off without me, and that's a lie. And that is one of the biggest lies that anyone can believe when they're going through that, because I can tell you from personal experience, it's not better. When someone commits suicide, the family that deals with that, they fall apart. The parents fall apart. The family, I mean, everybody. I mean, it's a nuclear bomb goes off, and nothing's the same.
You think you remove yourself, everything's better.
Yeah.
But really, you've just created a problem that didn't
For
exist
generations.
before.
People that have to, kids that have to go to school and say, my dad died, and ashamed now of that legacy.
Right.
And Mighty Oaks is all about legacy.
Yeah. What are you leaving behind that matters?
What are you doing?
Right. Yeah. So a couple things that you guys both brought up. One is community support. So I say two things. One is community support. One is leadership within the departments. We, at least from my perspective, live in an amazing community when it comes to support for law enforcement, for firefighters, first responders. We're like in this little microcosm, this bubble. There was a report published this week on the 50 best cities to raise children in America, and Murrieta was number 20 on that list, which is incredible.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons for that. There's good schools, there's the security and crime and community members and all those things. But we live in an amazing community, amazing support for our law enforcement. And I always say this, people think I'm joking, but if you don't believe it, go to the Murrieta PD Facebook page or the Temecula PD Facebook page. And it's hilarious. The stuff that's on there and the banter back and forth between the department and people. Clearly not everyone loves law enforcement, but we live in a community that supports law enforcement. I took my family a couple weeks ago to the National Night Out, where it's called downtown, and just police officers and different displays and stuff, but just a great community atmosphere. So I don't know that we necessarily connect to this here, but in a lot of communities, there is disdain, as you mentioned, for law enforcement. So a couple things. Why is that the case? And what impact does that have on police officers? And the third thing, if we could change the perception, even an understanding of what police officers do for people that live in those communities, what impact would that have on the people that live there?
Yeah, and the officers themselves.
And the officers themselves.
I mean, where I worked was much different than Murrieta. When I started riding with you guys, working as a chaplain, I'm just like,
people handing stuff out.
Yeah, what's going on? They'd go to calls and they're like, what are we doing here still? Why don't we slap this guy and leave? I was having flashbacks, But it was.
John's a great chaplain, by the way. He's doing good work.
I don't get it. No, but I was really impressed. I was like, man, I wish I would have worked in a. I really did. I really thought, man, this would have been what police officers are supposed to do. This is really, serving a community. That's not what I did. Most of the time, not everybody in Whittier. Obviously, there's some really good people there, but it was like us against them there, opposed to being in the cars here. Now it's like we're one, in a sense, right? Like you guys are really there to serve these guys, and it's impressed me a lot with Murrieta PD, and now being part of it, I feel definitely privileged, and it's changed my outlook a little bit for sure. And I thought about that, what you're talking about, how that would have made me feel as a police officer having this kind of support, because it was much different. I think it would have changed a lot. So that impact on the officers, and then I see these guys giving back, and how hard they work for these guys, and that effect on the people would kind of relate to how they treat you. And so I think it's just a totally different world. It's blowing my mind seeing it. Yeah. So I think I was more on the other side. Yeah, but
the lack of support from the community, it has a psychological impact on police officers.
Well, I mean, we're police officers, but we're humans.
Right.
I mean, you think about a child that's abused, and you tell them, you're worthless. You have no value. You're garbage. They believe that.
You start to internalize
and you become that, and that affects everything around you.
So this is a question that I've had about this, particularly, looking at the New York situation right now, is I look at this, having never been in law enforcement, and I go, if I worked for a boss or in a community that didn't like me, I'd go somewhere else.
You'd quit, right?
I wouldn't just keep doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I've had a hard time connecting those. But it's what you just said. It's you do at some point because you identify with the uniform, you identify with the city. You probably started because you wanted to make a difference.
Exactly.
And now the people you're there to serve, they hate you, and so you internalize that and start to believe it.
Right. And when you're a police officer, there's a lot of vetting that goes on before you become one. Right. So it's not like just a regular job where I can be like, hey, I'm going to quit here and
go somewhere else.
Tomorrow I'm going to get some. I mean, it's months of a process. In that interim, you don't have a paycheck. In that interim, you don't have any source of money. And then you think, well, my kids go to school here. We've been in the community for a long time. We have a church. But then those things start to become negative things. You start to feel like, wait a second, I can't get out. There's nothing else that I can do. But when you have an agency like my agency that supports programs like Mighty Oaks, that is willing to say, hey, we know that our officers are human beings and they go through issues, and we want to get them to be better. And the way we do that is by giving them time to deal with the issues that they're dealing with. Because, I mean, at my agency, there's a very high expectation of service, and the people know that. So when you come out and you deal with an issue the wrong way, or you give some dumpy service, they're going to call in and be like, hey, watch commander,
right,
well, you know, this officer was really being rude to me, and they take those things seriously.
Right.
You know, and I can think of sergeants, I can think of lieutenants, captains, and even my chief. I could go to anybody in that chain of command and say, I'm really struggling right now. And they would lock arms with me and help me heal and help me become better. And that's not the way it is in everywhere, because you don't have time for that.
Right. Right. Because you don't have time for it.
Right.
You're just dealing with whatever's right in front of you and whatever's happening right now.
I mean, and then you add promotions. You know, you add, hey, I'm trying to do better than the guy next to me. So now if I say I got a problem and he doesn't have a problem, but I say I do, now I'm going to be looked at as damaged and be like, well, maybe he's not mentally ready for this. This new assignment that, you know, because the guy going in against him, he doesn't have those problems. So we're going to give it to him.
Do you think that police officers telling their stories and becoming human is helpful for people in a community?
Absolutely, because they see us with the badge, right? They see us, the tough guy. You know, there's sort of, in a way, a disconnect. We're police officers, almost like RoboCops, right? And I mean, you think about officers that make mistakes, we're held to a higher standard because the community thinks, hey, this guy's supposed to be perfect. He messed up. You know, crucify him. But when you have officers who are come down and say, hey, I take this stuff off, I'm not bulletproof underneath this. Like, I have issues just like you, just like everybody else, and I want to deal with them. And what you're doing to make it worse isn't helping me get any better.
We just did an interview, I think it was out on last week, with two guys who have their own podcast. It's called the War Stories Podcast, and one is a retired police officer, one's current police officer, one was in the military, one wasn't. But part of their mission is telling stories, not only veteran stories, but police officer stories. And one of the interesting things talking to them, and they said to me, was, I've had these people call or email and say, I wasn't really pro law enforcement, but I listened to the stories of these guys and thought, man, I should really support them more.
That's pretty cool.
And I think there's something to that. Yeah, I think people just don't know. They get caught up in the us against them kind of mentality and aren't sure. So on the other side of it, and I think being proactive as a department to communicate to the community what the police officers do for them is helpful. But on the other side of it, there's leadership.
Exactly.
So again, we have wonderful leaders in our, not just in our police department, but in our community. I like going places. We have, was 150,000 people or something in Murrieta, something like that. So we're a mid-sized city, one of the fastest growing cities in California. So we're not a small, you know, it's not Mayberry. But when you go somewhere, community representatives are there, people are out talking, the mayor's there, city council members are there, the police chief's out walking around, the fire chief's walking around. So we have good leadership, not perfect leadership. There's no perfect leadership, but good leadership in our community. But a lot of departments where there is animosity between the officers and the citizens, I believe, and again, I'm asking you, but I believe it's because of bad leadership from the top. New York, that is 100%. I would say that is the problem. The commissioner doesn't like the police department, and the mayor doesn't like the police department, and the mayor said very publicly in a presidential debate that he's basically against his police officers, which is insane since they work for him.
That's a shame.
So that's a problem. Contrast, if you can, for me, what bad leadership looks like in a department versus what good leadership looks like in a department.
Well, good leadership is what I've seen being part of Murrieta, for sure.
What makes it good leadership?
The support of the officers, you know, not you know, in our department, I'll just give you an example, I guess, is just when you would make a mistake, like you'd make a mistake, or you'd get accused of something, you know, you were definitely set aside, you were definitely looked at as like, yeah, he probably did it. You know, when I went in for my first use of force beef, and this is something I was thinking about, and they read you your rights, that feeling like, and someone lied, it was like 100% lie, you know. There's some truth to it, but it wasn't, most of it was a lie, and they're reading your rights, and then how the leadership treats you, and how they talk to you, and man, that is not good leadership. You know, the support should be there, and
Right.
it definitely wasn't there at the place that I worked before.
Right.
As far as supporting the officers and believing them, and you know, some of the things that Gabe said, like when he said he could go to any one of his captains or chiefs or sergeants and express that, and he'd get help, and that would be just the opposite, you know, at my department. And I'm sure that's probably more true at more departments than not.
Right, sure.
Without a doubt. So that was definitely, I had more experiences in bad leadership. I had some really good leaders too that were always there for me. I had some sergeants that were just outstanding, and
Right.
and those were the guys that helped me get through a lot of hard times, you know,
Yeah.
without a doubt. But that was my experience. I think
Yeah.
yours are much different
Yeah.
than mine.
Well, so I think you get into bad leadership when you have administrators that don't have their ear to the ground.
Yeah.
And they don't know the heartbeat of their men that have
Right.
the boots on the ground.
Right.
They have to step down from those positions and go to the briefings. You know, go. You know, you see a lieutenant walking out, or you see an officer walking out to load up his car, and just be like, "Hey, you know, oh yes sir. Hey, how you doing, man?
Right.
Like, how's everything at home?" You know, really invest your time into that person and
Yeah.
truly understand
Yeah.
their struggles. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot going on in agencies. You know, lieutenants have to write grants. You know, they're always looking for grants, always looking for extra money.
Yeah.
Well, what about looking for programs for your guys? You know, what about being willing to say, hey, you know, today I'm going to, you know, just walk around and talk to the guys, or, you know, we're going to be at the range, we're just going to go
Yeah.
talk to them. And at my department, there is that. I mean, like I said, I can go to any of them and be like, hey, man, I'm hurting inside, and they will help
Yeah.
you. They'll show you how to get that help. I mean, they've invested in sending us to Mighty Oaks because they realize that, hey, we got to, you know, if we're going to keep this thing moving, we got to have the guys that have the boots on the ground, we got to have them in good shape mentally and physically.
And you can deal with a lot when you know that your superiors, the people that you work for, care about you.
Right.
You can deal with a lot of just garbage if you know people care about you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Even if they discipline you, you know, and you've
Right.
done wrong,
Right.
you're gonna be okay with it,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
because you know it's true, and you made a mistake, and they're still gonna pick you up and
Yeah.
help you get back on your feet. So
Right.
Interesting story. Was it 2 weeks ago? There was that shooting in Philadelphia. Was it 2 weeks ago? Say 6 or 8 Philadelphia SWAT team members got shot. Some guys were held hostage in the house. It was a nutty story. No one was killed, thankfully, and the police chief said it was miraculous that no one was killed. The week before that, Chad
Was in Philadelphia.
spoke to the
That's
SWAT
right.
team in Philadelphia
oh, really?
because their chaplain had heard about Mighty Oaks and what we do and whatever, and Chad was there at a church and said, hey, would you come speak to the SWAT team? I'm their chaplain. He spoke to him like a week before. They went and got involved in this crazy thing. If you saw the video, while they're trying to deal with the guy who's got police officers hostage, citizens in Philadelphia are throwing things at the police officers. It was a terrible situation. But when it was all over, the chaplain called back to Chad and said, I've had several of my officers thank me for having you come out and talk to them because, again, it's what you're just talking about. It shows that you guys care, but that we care and that we're trying to take care of them. And that changed the whole conversation around what happened for those guys. Also, interestingly, next week, hopefully, we'll have that chaplain on our show, so we're going to talk to him about that.
That's going to be cool.
But yeah, it's what can you deal with if you know that your leadership has your back?
Man.
Quite a bit.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when you have that kind of support, you realize that saying it is okay. I mean, I always take things back down to like the family level. You know, I mean, where we think about, you know, the first institution, you know, in the country, in the world is family, right? So if you have parents that support you, parents that will listen to you, then you can come to them and be like, hey, like, you know, instead of being like, no, I got to keep it locked in. I got to be, you know, yes sir, no sir. You know, I can't have a problem. And then you get disciplined, and now you feel, dude, not only did I do bad, but now I feel like I really am bad.
Yeah.
You know, but if you have that support and someone who's able to come and lock arms with you and ready and get you into battle, get you into fighting mode,
Yeah.
you know, ready to go, then that's it right there.
Yeah. What would you guys have both got quite a bit of law enforcement experience. You got a young guy or girl, someone new to the department, they're struggling. Maybe they've even confided in you for some reason. hey, I'm having these thoughts now. I've never had these before. Thoughts of taking my life. I feel hopeless. What would you tell them?
Man, talk to somebody right off the bat. Don't hold it in, you know, for sure. For sure. I mean, you know, they got to go with somebody. I mean, you know, for us, it's, you know, a pastor, a brother, you know, without a doubt. You know, holding stuff in, it's gonna, you're gonna go to, like Gabe already said, it's gonna two things to you. It's either gonna make you worse, right, or you're just gonna push it down and you're gonna explode, or you're just going to cope with it some way. You know, a lot of guys is drinking, drugs. There's all kinds of different issues. You know, and those are two things. But then I look at the third option, which is again, it's a choice that can make you better too. And I think we talk about this a lot. You know, and that's today when I look back on those things, the mistakes I've made, things I've been through. I appreciate life a lot more. I have a lot more gratitude. I have a lot more hope, knowing what I came from and where I am today, and that makes me, in a sense, happier understanding that aspect. And all those bad things and tough things that you're going through that make you feel like, you know, you want to take your life, those are also could be the things that make you a much better person.
Yeah, connect better to people. And
And appreciate life more. You know?
Yeah. What would you tell them, Gabe?
I think that if someone came to me and said, hey man, like I'm really struggling, I'm having thoughts of suicide, a lot of people's reaction would be like, whatever, dude, you're fine, shut up. No, you know, come on, you're joking.
Right.
You know, let's go have a beer after work and you'll be fine.
Sure.
You have to take it seriously. And you have to, you know, not like seriously like, oh, go, you know, let's take all your guns away, make you feel like a weirdo. But, you know, you go to that watch commander, you go to someone and say, hey, I just talked to so-and-so. They said they want to kill themselves. What are we going to do? You know, and they need to have a plan also there. And you need to also have resources for yourself. Yeah. I know that I've had friends at the department that have gone through things, and I said, hey, like, have you thought about Mighty Oaks? Like, let me tell you about it.
Right.
You know, so you have to love. That's really what it comes down to. You got to love the guy next to you.
Yeah.
And when someone tells you that, I know if my brother, my own brother came to me and said those things, it would hurt me.
Right.
You know, I'd be like, man, let's go right now.
Yeah.
And it's that same sort of care.
Yeah.
You know, you got to really invest and be like, hey, that hurts me that you want to do that. I'm not going to ignore it. You know, I'm going to get you through this process. We're going to go through it together, and you follow through. You know, you text, hey, the next day, hey man, how you doing? How's everything going?
Follow through.
Follow through.
Yeah, that's important.
I think sharing with the guys too. I mean, the big thing at the programs, and you saw this, Gabe, too, just a couple times you've been there, is them feeling like they're not alone.
Right.
You know, a lot of guys feel like nobody can understand
me.
I'm in this world. I'm in this situation, and man,
no one's ever been through this.
No one's ever been through it.
Right.
You know? And I talked to you about this before, because even being in a good place when I went to Mighty Oaks, I thought that.
Right.
And then I heard the stories like, whoa,
yeah,
there's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Circumstances are different.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Just that's probably the biggest game changer, I think, when guys go up there and they see that and they go from this to like the sunglasses come off, the hats come off, and they're like, wow, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
And that gives them hope that they're not alone. And then they see guys going and talking and sharing their experience of where they were and having those same feelings and where they are today. And you can't hide the joy, right? You can't hide that stuff, and they want that, you know. And for them to understand that they can get that too.
Yeah. For people who wouldn't be able to go to Mighty Oaks, I think it's important to understand that too.
Sure.
Like take our word for it. There's a lot of messed up people in the world. You're not the only messed up person in the world. When I was pastoring a church, I used to always joke that you look around, everybody thinks they've got it all figured out. You're the only one a mess because you look at everyone in this room, they've got it all figured out. Everyone's dealing with something. Everybody's dealing with something. Right. You're not alone, so don't be ashamed. Go get help. And that's awesome. We could talk all day, but we'll stop. I appreciate you coming by.
Heck yeah.
I know you have a job and stuff. So, taking care of teenagers. Making sure they get to class. And
keep them safe.
Keep them
Are you taking their lunches from them too? I'm just wondering.
Only sometimes. Hey, so for those watching, if you want to see an interesting video on the Murrieta Police Department Facebook page, when Gabe started his first day of school here last week, he had to come back to the car, get his lunch, and skip off to work. So,
right.
So go check that out.
Real stuff happening.
Go check that out. Real stuff happening. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll talk some more, but appreciate you guys coming by and talking about this. For those of you that are listening, again, if you're in the law enforcement community or the first responder community, first of all, there is hope, and just know that. And if you or someone you know is struggling, go to our Facebook page, but go to our website, mightyoaksprograms.org. There's a place on there to apply to a program. You apply. There's no cost to you to attend the program. We'll cover the cost of getting to the program. Just send that application off, and we'll make sure you get to the right place. But I will say this, there are other programs. Mighty Oaks is not the only program and not the only place to find help, but you need to find help. And so if you're struggling, you're not alone, you're not the only one, but find someone that you can trust and you can talk to. And there is the opportunity and the hope to move forward.
Yeah.
And I trust that you'll do that. Thanks for watching. Again, if you're listening somewhere else, go to our YouTube page and log into YouTube, and then like our page, and then hit the notification bell so you can find out when other episodes come online. We can put all kinds of stuff on our YouTube page, and we'd love to share that with you. Thanks for watching. Talk to you next time.